Hi everyone, and welcome to another preview by ThinkerThemer. I'm Amy, this is my wife Maggie,
Hello.
and today we're excited to be previewing for you Andromeda's Edge, the new game by Luke and Maximus Laurie and publisher Cardboard Alchemy. Now, this is the spiritual successor to Dwellings of Eldervale, and it's been affectionately called Space Dwellings.
Yes.
And people have been making a lot of comparisons, so we thought we'd make a special comparison video to talk you through our thoughts about some improvements we think that it makes above and beyond the excellent game of Dwellings of Eldervale. If you've never played Dwellings, don't worry, because we're going to explain Andromeda's Edge in a lot of detail, and if you don't want to hear that, well, you can skip forward using the timestamps to get through to the comparisons.
So in Andromeda's Edge, we find ourselves on the edge of the Andromeda galaxy, where there's a fair bit of debris of previous civilizations, when we're all different factions with our own kind of unique ability or focus, trying to develop our starships and grow our own civilization by using some of those leftover resources that are scattered about in different planets, building some really useful monuments and advancing our way through science, commerce, supremacy, population, and industry. But unfortunately, we're not alone. We're all going to be doing this amongst different raiders who are out there making all of our collective lives a bit more difficult and challenging. So ultimately, whatever player manages to do this in the most efficient and effective way will be the winner.
Now, the first thing I want to point out about the main board, this very large center board, is that the main playing space where you're going to be placing workers, i.e. your starships, is made up of this modular set of tiles that are going to be revealed as the game goes on. But it begins with two different types of tiles. There are tiles that are planet ripe for development, where we are going to be able to build these really cool 3D monuments onto them once we've collected enough resources and we have enough leaders to place there. The second type of tiles are bases, and each of these bases has a common action that can be used by all players who want to place a worker there and take that action. And what are you trying to get done in this game? Well, let's have a look at the player board. First of all, you have 4 different types of starships available to you, but you start with only 3 of the most basic kind, which are your transport starships. Now, these transport starships are really interesting because these are the ones that are going to help you populate your civilization in these different planets. And when you do that, just like in Dwellings of Eldervale, you are going to have to sacrifice this worker or this starship. So when this starship gets placed out somewhere where you can build, you place the starship there, and then you're going to be building on top of it, like so, and placing your leaders inside it, and now that ship is no longer available to you, and you're going to have to build some more ships to get more things done. So the first thing you want to be able to do is collect resources to not only develop on the board, but also to build more and different types of starships, because the starships also have different abilities, and that is really dictated mostly by where they can go on the map, whether they can go into an occupied space, and their range and battling ability. Because yes, in this game, if you move into a space that is adjacent to a raider who has the range to reach you, or one of your opponents moves into your space or you move into theirs, you are going to trigger a battle. The amount of firepower, i.e. the number of dice that you can bring into that battle, is dictated by the type of starship that you have, the number of starship that you have into that battle, because you're allowed to bring them all in from adjacent spaces to join the fight. But also in this game, there is a target number, and that is dictated by the total number of starships that you have in that battle. For example, if I had 3 starships in the battle, then the target number would be 3. And if I roll a number that is lower than 3, so a 2 or a 1, I would get to re-roll those dice, meaning that it is more advantageous to have more starships in a battle. Now, if you lose a battle, the only thing that happens to you is, imagine I was here and lost the battle, I'm going to go to the scrapyard. And the disadvantage of being in the scrapyard is that when you recall your starships, they are actually going to activate things in your tableau unless they are damaged and in the scrapyard. So you have 2 choices in this game. 1, place a worker or a starship from the launch pad out onto the board and take the action or the bonus resources that you're able to get. Or recall all of your starships. And when you recall them, this is a really neat part of the game, just like in Dwellings of Eldervale. When you recall them, you're able to place them out onto your tableau of actions that can help you get resources, take other actions, such as building a new starship, repairing a starship, or maybe even building a development. So the actions, you also get to take actions when you are recalling things, unless you're in the scrapyard, and then it just comes back to you and you don't get to activate anything. And that brings me to the next main part of this game, which are the different types of modules. So on the board, you can see that there are 4 different colors or different parts of your civilization that you are nurturing thematically by purchasing these different modules. When you purchase these modules by using one of the actions on the board, you are able to bring them into your tableau and build out to the side of your player board. Now, each of these are really interesting because when you are recalling those ships, you can place a ship onto one of these modules and activate the bonus that's underneath. Once you've activated a row with one of your starships, you can also activate other modules using energy, but we'll talk more about that later in this video. So the other thing is there are multiple types of resources in this game. There's energy as one of them. There is titanium, nanocarbon, ice, and the wild, which are credits in this game, and they will be all stored on your player board, and you have a maximum limits that you can hold there. Those resources are going to be used to build the development and to build starships and to get things done in the game. Now, all of this links back to these 5 tracks that are in the center of the board. You are going to be trying to move up as far as you can in those tracks because of many different reasons. One, they are all linked to a particular development type. So you can see that there is a blue track linked to the blue cities, which are linked to the blue planets. And depending on where you are in that blue track at the end of the game, that's going to dictate what your cities, the blue developments, are worth at the end of the game. On top of that, as you can see, these tracks are numbered, and the higher you are up on those tracks, the more victory points you're going to get at the end of the game, and along the way when events trigger the scoring for that particular track. Now, the timing or pace of this game is really determined by the event track. So there are spots on this board, such as along the track or when someone purchases a new module, that are going to mean that this event track moves along. When it hits the end of that track, after that player has completed their turn, we're going to do a couple of things. We're going to bring out a new tile and add it to the universe. And then we are going to turn over an event card. Now, this event card is going to have a special effect that impacts on all players. It's going to also score one of these tracks. So wherever you are on that track, you are going to get some victory points minus any damage that you've taken or attracted along the way. And then it's also going to introduce a new type of raider into the game. So these raiders are essentially the baddies that are lurking in the universe. They all have a special power, they have a range, and generally speaking, a different reward for the person who is able to take them down and clear the universe of these raiders. So this is going to generate more of them as we continuously try to clear them out of the galaxy. Now, one cool final thing that I'll talk about in relation to these cards is that, of course, you want the track to trigger where you are higher so that you get the most victory points every time one of these scores. Now, you can go out and travel out into the nebula, which is this part of the board that has no tiles on it, but has this little iconography here that says look at the top 2 cards of the event deck and keep one at the top and move one to the bottom of the deck. That is very powerful. You'll need a special starship to get there, but it can really help you manipulate the scoring system in this game. So now let's talk about the 7 improvements that we think this game makes above and beyond that of Dwellings.
All right, so let's talk about the first one. Since you were talking about the tracks, it's actually actually these tracks. So we did have in Dwellings of Eldervale, there were these sort of kind of magic tracks as well that ended up then at the end of the game becoming a bit of a multiplier. Here, it's really been streamlined and enhanced, I think, because they're really clear. There are collecting points along the way. You get to score them along the way, but also they all are very unique. So they all give you benefits in a particular area. So some of them are going to, for example, the science track is going to allow you to get these different tokens along the way where you can actually get really like sometimes fairly powerful bonuses. They all obviously, as Amy said, are going to dictate how many points their particular building for that track is going to be worth by the end of the game. And one of my absolute favorites, and one that I overuse all the time, which is the commerce track, is it'll actually dictate, it's only until you get to that vault level 1 or level 2, which is when that's going to be how many points are leftover resources going to be worth to you by the end of the game. And so it can be incredibly powerful.
Because by default, they're not worth anything.
Yeah,
so
nothing.
If you want those to be worth something and you have a strategy to just collect as many resources and then have them be worth 2 victory points at the end of the game, that can amount to a lot of points.
Yes.
And Maggie does that all the time.
I love it.
All the time. While I'm busily
that.
working on the developments, Maggie's over
just
here.
hoarding resources to try.
Resources.
And then things like also with the population track, determining what your hand size can be with these really, really handy kind of technology cards that have all sorts of different abilities. Kind of like what the magic cards used to be in
Yeah, and we didn't talk about those, but these cards can be really impactful for your game because they give you one-off powerful abilities. They have these diplomacy cards that can be played at the beginning of a battle that can really change the way the battle goes.
And even stop the battle.
And even stop the battle, absolutely. The only thing that these cards no longer have are end game scoring conditions. Now you'll find them on this particular blue development. They have end of game abilities. So I like that because it's a little bit more fair in that everybody has an opportunity to get those end of game scoring points. And some of them that don't relate to you, you don't need to buy them.
Yeah. I feel overall I'm way more invested now in these tracks, and they just feel so much more meaningful along the way, and they're allowing you to kind of see and kind of create those points along the way, as opposed to just waiting till the end of the game and go, something got multiplied and this person ended up with this like outrageous kind of runaway lead.
Yeah, and I do want to talk about this track as well, because this is the only way, this brown track, I'm just going to call them by their colors, is the only way that you can upgrade your starships, because everyone starts with these tiles that can be placed on top of your board to change their range or to change what they're able to do or how they act in battle. So that's really cool as well. The second improvement that I think that these tracks make to Dwellings is the way that they score along the way. So in Dwellings, there's a lot of like mystery around who's in the lead, because so much of the points are found out at the end using the multiplier of the tracks. But in this game, there's also this sense of urgency of moving up each of the tracks as well, because you don't know which one is going to be triggered by an event to score immediately. And so someone might be at the top of this track and get 20 victory points, and I haven't focused on that, so I get 0.
Yeah.
And there's this sense of, oh my goodness, I don't know what's upcoming, but I know Maggie is the one that looked at the cards and put that card at the top.
Yeah.
And so it's probably one that Maggie's high up on, and I haven't moved on that track at all. And so you start to have to think about how do I move up on that track? And the main way to do that is to purchase the modules that relate to that particular track. So I really enjoy that tension.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can manipulate that deck.
Yeah, I love that when multiple people are manipulating, because it's like you get to have a look at those two and you put the one that you want on top, and then someone else gets to have a look at them and you're like, oh no, are they going to put my one to the bottom, or what's going to happen? And so like that can create for a lot of excitement.
And I also like the way that it's only a particular type of voyage vessel that is able to go out into this nebula and take that action for the most part in this game. And so that's really interesting as well, because you don't start with that particular vessel. So if you are looking at that as a strategy to manipulate that deck as much as possible, you might build that really soon before anybody else. And so you're the only one that can travel out there. You're the only one that can change that, and then you know exactly what's going to score. So I really like that as a dynamic in the game.
The third improvement that we'd like to talk about is when it comes to the battle, which is a very sort of similar battle type to what Dwellings of Eldervale had, which is very, very streamlined. Just depending on the ship that you've got the presence there in that location, they all dictate how many dice or power they kind of bring into it. Then any adjacent monuments that are yours, again, will add to that. And then potentially you can use one of the resources, so energy can be added as
Instead
a way
of
to
swords in
yeah,
Dwellings.
exactly. It can be added to kind of increase your dice roll. And then as when it's resolved, it's really just whatever the highest number die, and then kind of following from that. If like two people ended up with 6 and 6, it's like, well, what was your next highest? 5. Oh, 3. Okay, well then that person wins.
Yeah.
Very, very easy to facilitate to run that battle. But then even if you lose, it's not devastating because you get a benefit. Yes, you're sent to the scrapyard, which again, it's annoying because you won't get to reactivate things on the way back unless you fix them. But you get to get either an additional technology card, or you get to activate one of your moons, which are this sort of resource tokens that you've lodged on your player board along the way.
Yeah, because you are collecting these moons out in kind of like in Dwellings where you're collecting the tiles that have resources on them. You can choose to use them immediately, or you can slot them somewhere.
Yeah.
In Dwellings, you would slot them onto the tableau cards. Here, that is true too. You will slot them onto the different modules, but you can also place them in between the modules. And if when you're doing the recall action and you're activating both sides, you also get to activate that. But if you lose the battle, you can also choose to activate one of those slotted moons.
But I haven't even talked about what the improvement is, because that's like a lot of those elements are very
similar. We like them.
Yeah, we like them.
We like them very much.
It makes it very easy to implement. The bit that I think it's another really nice improvement is that target. So you have a target in battle, which is dictated by your presence. So how many ships you have present there, which is excellent because it means that then if it's really an incentive to bring in as many of your ships as possible. All of a sudden, if I have 3 ships in there, it doesn't matter if I roll a 1 or a 2. Those dice can be re-rolled, which is really cool. Like that's a nice little kind of, it's not difficult to implement, but it gives you an added benefit.
The most dice that you can have is limited by your pool of dice. So the most dice you can add to a battle is 6, irrespective of how you're adding that. So I like the way that it's a reward for bringing in more ships that could potentially all be taken out to the scrapyard, but it's increasing that target level or the minimum dice value. So I really like that too, and I do think it's improvement on the original Dwellings battle sequence. Now, the fourth improvement is actually a really big one, I think, which is a massive improvement to the tableau or the recall actions and your ability to build up an engine on your player board. The way that it works here is really interesting. It takes a little second to wrap your head around it because as you are building out these modules on your board, which can stretch much further, especially if we had a bigger table, but as we're building this out, you are going to have new actions that you can do, whether that's just getting a resource or being able to take a resource, spend it to create other things, or to even take an action that you would normally take on the board, but to do it in the recall part of your turn. So it can be really powerful. The modules themselves also help you move up the tracks, and that's really important, as we spoke about. But the way that this works is that when you're recalling, you can place one of these ships into anywhere on your row. So it doesn't need to be the first module. It can be any of them. But then once you've placed a ship onto a row, you can also activate extra modules in that row by using energy. So if I had some energy, I could then place that there to also activate this other module on the row. So the number of things you can get done is limited by how many starships you're bringing back, plus the amount of energy that you've stored up to be able to get things done. I really like the green row or the primary reactor because all you need to do is place one ship there and it activates everything along that row. So that's a fun way to generate a lot of energy that, as I mentioned, you're going to need to get things done in this game. Energy also helps you add die to your battles as well. So energy is a really useful commodity.
I think this is probably the bit that shines the most for me in this game. It's like, I actually really enjoyed it as an element in Dwellings, where it's like, my retrieve action is not wasted. Usually in most games, it's like, I'm wasting a turn to bring my workers back. Whereas that kind of, to me, introduced the whole, I'm bringing them back, but I'm also getting some goodies.
Stuff.
Yeah, and maybe like one action here or there. This is supercharged that to the point where like now I actually look forward almost more to the retrieve action, because I love building this outrageous engine where usually like I start running out of space because like I've got a couple of tracks that are just like endlessly long. So and it just becomes that whole thing of like you start taking your turn because this is going to be a while.
Yeah, and they do recommend that as long as it's not impacting anybody else. You can leave someone to do all of their activations while we continue the game. But yeah, it does feel super satisfying, especially when you've collected a lot of energy. You get to activate so many different things, and then you're generating a resource, which then you'll spend to do something else, which then maybe you spend it to move up a track, and it feels like really combo-tastic once you've built that out.
I love that there's some of the modules, like this one here, where they'll have an icon in this circle, which means that I, as the person activating it, get all of those, but everyone else, all other players, get the icon that's in the circle. So it's like everyone gets, a carbon. It was like, oh, thank you. That's like, you're welcome. Yeah. So that one's a food distribution hub. So that kind of makes sense, but I don't know why I'm feeding people carbon.
I don't either. Don't question it too hard.
Look into it.
The other thing about the modules is some of them, when you buy them, are going to have damage on them. And so when this gets added, I'm going to add a piece of damage, and I can't actually use that module until I repair that damage using the repair action. And I really want to do that because during an event scoring phase, you're going to minus points for having any damage. And at the end of the game, they're also worth -2 victory points. So we don't want to leave them there, and we want to use our modules, so we need to repair those quick smart.
The fifth improvement that we feel this has over Dwellings is the asymmetry. So back in Dwellings, you had all the different factions. You had asymmetric powers for a couple of the worker types, or your people had a unique ability, which kind of made it a little bit. It felt more fiddly, because it was like, well, first I have to summon that particular character, and then remember that that's the ability that only that character has. Here, the factions themselves, again, they come with 2 abilities or 2 kind of cool things or benefits that they have, but it's for the faction. So it's just things that you can do throughout the entire game.
Ongoing benefits that are available to you from day one.
It's just so much simpler, and it's still, and they're not difficult things to remember. They're simple, but they will add to your strategy. They will kind of inform what you might focus on or what you'll try and do.
Definitely. And part of that is that they also provide you with 2 tracks where you'll start ahead of other people, and your starting resources. So your starting resources are asymmetric in this game, unlike Dwellings, which creates a sense of, well, I've got this special ability and I'm already further up on that track, so maybe I'll have to go after those developments, or this is what I'll do. One of mine was this one here. And when I lose a battle, I still get to move up the supremacy track, which you normally only do if you win a battle. And so I was like, I'm just going to get into fights.
Yeah, really I'm just going to move around.
Get into fights, because even if I lose, I'm going to move up that track. And then if I'm moving up that track, well, then maybe I should focus on trying to build the obelisk, which is related to that track. So you can see how everything is so well integrated that it makes you focus on a strategy. But I also like that they're not so convoluted that it makes it really hard to play as a different faction. In fact, when we are teaching this game, it is super easy for people to understand what their faction does and how that changes their game slightly.
And it does add to that bit of flavor of every time that I play, because there's quite a number of factions to choose from. Every time you play, you're like, oh, I haven't played with that one before. That's cool. Let me try that. And it does make you look at the game a little bit differently. So I really appreciated that.
And the 6th thing that we think is an improvement is related to this faction ability somewhat, because your faction also gets a unique type of starship that is related to your special power in some way. So thematically linked, mechanically linked. And this is an upgrade that is only available to me, and it has some special power. So when I equip this on top of my starship, it's going to give me that ability for that starship moving forward. But I want to talk more broadly about the ability to upgrade these. So in Dwellings, you are but purchasing different types of workers, like the dragon,
You're not purchasing
summoning them, that are able to do different things. Whereas in this game, you still have that. So there is a variety of different types of workers, starships, but you can also improve on those by going up this track in order to upgrade them. And upgrading them is free. You've just got to move up that track to get to the right spot. And I just really like the subtle differences that brings in. Like maybe I want to focus more on attacking, so I'm going to improve my fighter into a more evolved fighter, or I'm going out exploring, so I want to have more starships that can move into this nebula space. I really like that. It's a small, subtle thing. It doesn't add too much cognitive overload, and I really enjoy that as well.
It gives you something to look forward to. Sometimes you're like, oh, that's really powerful. Okay, I'm going to make sure that I try and build that really early on so that I can use it. And the seventh and final improvement that we want to talk about is the actual developments themselves. So the actual buildings or monuments that you get to construct in such a cool, this is again, this like the first version of the Dwellings is like, it was such a cool concept of like, you leave your meeple there and you put a little hat on them, which is the roof, and now it's a dwelling. That was really cute.
Super cute. I still think that's really cute.
That's yeah. And we really like, cute. Every time I thought I play, I'm like, oh, click, oh, so cute. This just takes it to the next level because yes, you still have your base, so your transport being the that you have to obviously plan to leave back in that planet, and also make sure that it doesn't get into trouble and that someone doesn't come in battle and take it away and send it to the scrapyard. So making sure that you have that there. But then there's really cool 3D structure that comes on top of it, and you have your little your leaders that you need to have been recruiting along the way. So it's not just a matter of like, oh, I'm there, I've got the resources to pay for that building, and it's done. It's like, no, you also have to make sure that you have enough leaders available to you, which are these little tokens. And you'll see that the different buildings will have a different number of requirements of leaders, which take the form of these little the little things. I don't even know what you call them, like the little bits that you would be plugging in there.
Well, your leaders that are staying in there.
You would never have a different color.
Get out of my building.
I'm infiltrating a yellow leader into
And this is a prototype, of course. So of course, all of the components are subject to change. But I feel like this is just such a cute little concept because, as you can see, they all slot into the developments in different ways that really bring them to life on the board. And the number of leaders that you have within a development is going to impact on the amount of victory points that you'll get for building that development. And I don't know, they're just really cute, and I like that they sit on so well on top of these transport starships. Yes, it's a little bit of a novelty, but it's one that I appreciate.
I enjoy it.
It totally is practical, but also it brings to life what you're doing, and it feels momentous to build these monuments.
And it's cool to have a little building that has little protruding things of your color. It's just the
different
final
ways,
effect.
depending on what type it is.
In different ways. Yeah, so like I love, for example, with the observatory, when you actually put the little leader in it,
they go square side.
Yeah, this one goes square side in. So you've got the little, it's like a telescope. So it's like, that's so cool. That's very clever and very cute.
It is really cute. But mechanically, the thing that I like the most is what Maggie's mentioned, is that you do need to make sure you not only have the resources, but also the leaders. And that, I think, helps a little bit with the fact that in Dwellings, what happens, and in this game, is when a new planet is revealed, because only one person can build a development there, there's this sudden rush to get there first. And this slows people down a little bit because not only do you have to have the right resources on hand, but you need to have the right number of leaders. And if you hadn't been preparing for that, well, you're not going to be able to go there straight away and take that spot. So it's just one more layer that's added. And like everything in this game, I feel like it's just a slight additional layer that adds complexity and more strategy into the game, which we really enjoy. So now let's talk briefly about player count. We have played this at 2, 3, and 4. Unfortunately, the solo mode was not ready for testing at the point where we're testing this prototype, but we have enjoyed it at all player counts. Obviously, this is a highly interactive game. There's battling involved. There's racing for different benefits involved. So the more players you have, the more interactive that is going to be. But what I found really interesting, well, the different player count interaction was interesting to me because of that race element when a new planet comes out and everybody wants to develop there. There were moments in a 3 and 4 player game where I felt like I was kind of, my hands were tied a little bit because I was focused on doing developments and no new planets were being triggered. And so the difference between Dwellings and Andromeda's Edge is that there's no action you can take to reveal a new one of these, which means that you have less control over forcing the end game, which is probably a good thing, but you are kind of waiting for that event to trigger, which can sometimes feel like a bit of lull time for me because I like to focus on the development. So
and I kind of feel like, because here the end game gets triggered when by an agreed kind of point, so threshold. So it's like, well, as soon as we reach 50 or 60 or 70 points, that will trigger end of game. It may actually mean that you don't get to see most of the planets. So, or not most, so all of the colors. So, for example, I may have started really strongly where my faction is really focusing on, say, and this happened to me once with the yellow track, and then the yellow planets didn't really come out. And so it's like, even though I was really high up in that track, I wasn't really able to build the monuments that matched. And so or sometimes it's like you're trying to build, but it's just, particularly in the higher player counts, you can't really get there soon enough, or then it's like it doesn't matter if you get there soon enough, there's like constant battles ensuing.
So it does limit your ability to specialize in a particular type of monument. And I found that when I first started playing the game, that was something I really wanted to do. I wanted to specialize. I'm going to get to the top of this track and I want to build all 3 obelisks if I can be the first to get there. That is not usually possible because of the randomization of these tiles. So that is one small little thing that means that you, generally speaking, you need to spread yourself around a bit more than that. You need to try and get up the track, all of the tracks as much as possible, or at least the majority of them to do well in this game. So that's one little thing that differs from Dwellings that, you know, I'm not sure I am totally in love with, but this is leading into the player count conversation because I found that to be far less of an issue at 2 players.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I really enjoyed this game at 2 players. I felt like it was a better 2-player experience than Dwellings just because it's more interesting, there's more things, there's more differentiation in our strategy.
Definitely crunchier overall as a game in every sense of the word. Yeah,
and so at 2 players, we really enjoyed playing. It took us about an hour and 20 minutes at 2 players, and there was enough interaction to keep it interesting, but also I got to do more developments, and especially with Maggie focusing on resource generation for those points at the end, and we were within 5 points of each other most of the time. And so
it felt really tense, but at the same time, and then there wasn't the downtime, which is some of the things that I struggle with in the 3 and particularly the 4 player count. The downtime when you're waiting for other people to finish taking their turns can be a bit much, particularly if you have AP or like analysis paralysis prone players. And then those recall actions can be
very elongated. But I think that trade-off is if you like a more interactive game, you know, of course it's going to take longer to get back to you. But then you get this, especially with the peaking at those the event cards, it's way more fun with more people because, you know, if I do it, Maggie probably knows, well, you've probably put yours there and I'm just going to now try and swap it back. But with more people, you're like, did they leave it there?
Yes,
I don't know. Do they also want to score that track? I'm not sure.
What choices they may have? What was the other alternative?
And you get to battle more frequently and things like that. It just puts more restrictions on that worker placement part of the game as per usual. But it's really fun at all player counts. I will say I've enjoyed this at all player counts. There's not a bad one. And the final question we want to talk about is, do you need to own both? Most people are going to say, I own Dwellings. Do I need to own Andromeda's Edge? And this is there's not a simple answer to this, aside from the fact that, well, we'll give you some things that we think about it. One, this is more crunchy.
This is definitely the more complex. It's like the sophisticated older sibling, you know, to Dwellings of Eldervale, because at every it's not only
Even though
that,
it's younger.
even though it's younger, yeah. But it's like I feel like it's had more
evolved.
time to simmer and go. These are the bits that should shine more, and these are bits that are actually, you know, detracting or making things more confusing. So everything that's been added, I feel like, yes, it's making it more complex, but it's also kind of streamlined and honed in of what made those elements satisfying to begin with in the, you know, in Dwellings. One big difference here is theme. So from a theme point, I personally connect a lot more to Dwellings than I do to space, anything space related. So that was probably my big, even though there's so many things that I really, really enjoy about this game mechanically, thematically, it's like space, you know.
Space, I know. Everyone in the comments is always like, why do you hate space so much?
I don't know why I hate space. I hate it. I'm bored by it. I don't know why.
I feel no feelings towards it. Yeah, I'm the same. In Dwellings, I really love the cute little wooden meeples. I love the little hats that go on top of the meeples to make them a dwelling.
Yeah.
Super cute. This has less cute elements and more serious elements, but mechanically, I believe this is the stronger game.
I would agree.
This is the game that I would rather play if you set it up. I love Dwellings. Like, we review Dwellings and we really enjoy it. So we're coming from the perspective of loving that game, but this does feel like, you know, they've reflected on that design and made improvements, and it's just more interesting. I think there's more to do.
I think this is definitely also a longer experience. It's a crunchier, thinkier experience, but it's also a longer experience. Like, we've played Dwellings after playing this, and it's like, oh, this actually feels
45 minutes.
This feels so fast now. So if you're introducing this not world, but almost like this type of game to newer players, the rules, I feel like it's a lot more streamlined and the turns are a lot faster in Dwellings.
There's less you can do, which makes it easier to teach, but
the recall is simpler, the action is simpler,
but
I
will say, I think these tracks are easier to understand.
I agree.
They are much clearer and they're less abstract than the tracks that only multiply at the end of the game for Dwellings. This, you get to see the benefits of moving up these tracks quicker, which makes it easier, I think, to cognitively process.
But this is a lot more overall. It's a longer teach. It actually it's a bigger table sort of hog as well. So yeah, I think it depends. The level.
Have we helped you at all?
It depends your appetite. You know, your appetite and your thematic. You know, what are you in the mood for? So yeah.
And to answer the question, we will keep both. But we hope you've enjoyed this preview. If you did, please like this video, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and we'll be back with more board game content soon. But otherwise, bye for now. Bye.